Section 3 of Chapter 10 of Marx's Capital, Volume 1 is titled Branches of English Industry Without Limits to Exploitation. In Section 3 of Chapter 10, Marx is going to look at some of the examples in his day of capitalists running amok and exploiting the working class as much as they physically can. A lot of this sounds like the sort of things you imagine when you think of the worst days of the Industrial Revolution. In one example, Marx cites the use of child labor in the lace trade in Nottingham, working literally all day. He says, quote, "Children of 9 or 10 years old were dragged from their beds at 2, 3, or 4 o'clock in the morning and compelled to work for a bare subsistence until 10, 11, or 12 at night, their limbs wearing away, their frames dwindling, their faces whitening." In another example, Marx cites various children's labor conditions for the cotton industry, one of whom being a 7-year-old forced to work 15 hours a day. Marx then cites various doctors' reports about the health of workers in the industrial pottery industry, showing that they have very low life expectancies and are susceptible to a wide range of pulmonary diseases. Then, Marx turns his attention to the matchmaking industry, where a technique for applying phosphorus to a stick had been recently found. And of course, easy access to fire was a big deal in the mid-1800s. Marx found that half the workers are children, and many of them have tetanus and phosphorus poisoning from all the chemicals in the air. There was a particular disease called phossy jaw, or the jawbone would necrotize and decay in the mouth. Some workers were so poisoned that when they vomited, their vomit glowed from phosphorescence. More recently, modern studies of people who died in those factories found that many of them suffered rickets and scurvy, and their bone structure was deformed. The children would literally have disfigured faces, and there would be the stench of rotting jawbone coming from their mouths before they died. Marx writes that, quote, "Dante would have had the worst horrors of Inferno surpassed in this industry," unquote. Marx moves on to the baking industry, talking about how, at times, workers who made bread would be forced to work 18 hours a day, occasionally more. Their bosses would sell the bread at below market rate and could afford to do so by underpaying the workers. It got to the point that other bread makers, those who were selling it at a fair price, would complain to the government about it. Then Marx moves on to the rail industry, citing a railcar accident that killed hundreds of passengers that could have been prevented if it weren't for the fact that the workers there were being overworked, at times working 20 hours a day. And during holidays, they would have to work 40 to 50 hours straight without a single break. This sounds a lot like some of the problems that truck drivers have complained about today. Of course, assuming you're listening to this at a time before that job gets automated. I was talking about automated cars and whatnot. Automated truck driving, driverless cars. Things like that occur into the present day. We're all familiar with child slave miners who dig diamonds out of the ground, for example. There's an important lesson to be understood here. Capitalists care primarily about profit, not human well-being. Those who don't are outcompeted in the market until all that exists are those who do. And these capitalists, literally, will kill you if they can get away with it and make a profit doing so. We know this. We have the historical record, and we see it going on today. But this is one of those contradictions in capitalism. It doesn't actually help the capitalists to have workers dying on the job. They need those workers to sell the labor power. The capitalist would truly rather not have to kill their workers. The capitalist doesn't maniacally go around rubbing their hands together trying to figure out new and creative ways to mutilate and murder their workers. They just prioritize profit above all else. One way to rectify this contradiction from the side of the workers is to fight for more reasonable working hours or higher pay. But in the next section, we'll look at a way to rectify this contradiction from the perspective of the capitalist, and one that is very familiar to pretty much everyone: the shift system.